Welcome to Art Toronto. My name is Mia Nielsen, and I'm the director of the show. Today, we're excited to present Canadian artists in the New Museum's 2021 Triennial. This is a very special exhibition that happens every 3 years and is often a career launcher for exciting artists that are coming up at the time. So today, we're thrilled to hear from Margo Norton. She's one of the curators of the exhibition, as well as a few important Canadian artists that are part of that show, including Nadia Belerique, Laurie, Kang, and Jeneen, Frei, and Njootli. This is presented by RBC, and our moderator is Corrie Jackson, RBC's Senior Curator. Enjoy.
So firstly, I want to say a very sincere thank you to you all for taking the time to sit, connect, and talk about your work in the very significant context of the 2021 New Museum Triennial entitled Soft Water, Hard Stone, which will open concurrently with Art Toronto this year, so running October 28th, 2021 to January 23rd, 2022. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Margo Norton, co-curator of the Triennial, alongside Jamila James. We also have Jeneen, Frei, and Njootli, Vanetgichman artist whose work undulates between sound, performance, installation, and sculpture. Jeneen studied at both Emily Carr and UBC. We also have Laurie Kang, based in Toronto, Canada, whose photographic, sculptural, and installation practices continue to look at relations between object and body, as well as Nadia Belerique, whose work also holds sculptural and photographic practices. I'm really excited to see these all in conversation, and I really encourage everyone listening to take the time to learn about the artist's broader practices independently. I think the importance of this triennial in a lot of ways can't be understated. The New Museum Triennial is the only reoccurring international exhibition in New York devoted to emerging artists from around the world. And it provides a unique platform for a new generation of artists who are shaping current discourses of contemporary art and in a lot of ways, the future of culture and the conversations that come out of it. Regardless of the current state of international travel, I think I can comfortably say that the importance of physical exhibitions and the relationships and conversations that come out of them remains really essential, both for the artists as well as for audiences, through the different ways that we can connect and take on those conversations. The triennials act as a marker of ascending perspectives that offer new reference points for how we can think about both our contemporary moment and look forward. So thank you all again. And I'm going to ask a few questions of each of our speakers and go into a few of the works in the exhibition. Margo, congratulations on all of the work that you've done so far. It's been really exciting to kind of spend time and sit and read and hear your perspectives. In reading your exhibition essays and seeing how you're approaching the exhibition, the intent of impermanence feels like an overarching thematic. Can you share some of your thoughts on how the exhibition's themes break down across the spaces of the New Museum and also how it can be installed in the physical space?
Sure. Thank you so much, Corrie. And thank you for bringing us together to speak about these ideas of the Triennial, which are right now, we're just in the final stages of organizing the exhibition, which we've been working on for about 3 years now. It's actually quite incredible to have that time to do this research and have these very in-depth conversations with artists throughout the process, including all the artists that are here today. And it's great to all be together. And I thought I would just start by first speaking a little bit about the exhibition's kind of overarching theme and a bit more about the title of the show, which is Soft Water, Hard Stone, which you mentioned earlier. Just kind of unpack a little bit of the kind of thematic threads with that title. So the title actually comes from a proverb, which is popular in Brazil, and we heard it from a Brazilian artist in the exhibition named Gabriella Mareb. And the title and proverb informs a work of hers. And we heard it from her on a studio visit in Rio, actually in, what was it? I think August of 2019. So this was, of course, like prior to the pandemic happening.
An in-person studio visit.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
We're very lucky that we had actually about 1.5 years of physical research before all the travel restrictions were in place, and kind of honed in on the theme and the subject for the show kind of prior to the pandemic happening. So the full proverb, which Gabriella translated for us, is soft water on hard stone hits until it bores a hole. And it is said to have two meanings. One, which is about this idea of perseverance and resistance and the impact that a small gesture can have in time. And then the second one is about the fact that time can destroy even the most perceptibly solid material. So very much about impermanence, as you mentioned, inevitable change, things that I feel like we've all had a deep lesson in this past year, but have become much more profound since. And of course, as I mentioned, this kind of title and theme came kind of prior to the pandemic, but it was almost as if we were in this moment when many structures that we once thought to be stable or, forever, or, kind of took for granted, were being revealed to be precarious or broken and really in need of some intense revision. And so when we were invited to curate the Triennial, it was important that we actually not have a theme already in mind and rather let that theme emerge out of the research process. And so it was really out of the conversations with artists that we had that we, and kind of in-depth conversations that we kind of saw this theme emerging. This idea of precarity and changeability, and not really in a didactic sense, but rather in an emblematic one, something that was, in the use of kind of unstable materials and porous architecture and works that kind of transform over time and destabilize this notion of a static art object. And we think of a lot of the works as almost catalysts, and how we might breathe new life into remains of collapsed constructs. So just a few words about the show in the physical space, and then we can move on to the artists and the individual works. But when we were planning the show, it was important for us that we kind of break up the themes among the floors of the museum. The new museum is designed almost like this layer cake, and we wanted to kind of treat each floor in a very distinct way. And so on the fourth floor is actually where Nadia Belerique's work is situated, is going to have a lot of natural light. And the idea is for it to feel almost like you're stepping into the outside. So the light will kind of shift throughout the course of the day. Here we're kind of thinking a lot about the regenerative potential of the natural world and our kind of inseparable relationship to it. A lot of works kind of mixing organic and industrial. Nature's almost taking over. Also, lots of works are addressing kind of longer and slower timescales and point to this kind of adaptability of nature and its ability to persist. And then on the third floor, where Laurie Kang's work is situated, we'll have a much more industrial feeling. And on this floor, we were thinking a lot about the relationships between the body and architecture, the idea of the mediated body, the kind of idea of the built environment as an extension of ourselves. And so many artists on this floor are also addressing ideas of displacement and gentrification and interdependence between ourselves and our own environments. And then kind of moving down to the second floor and the lobby gallery as well, we see many artists embracing the impermanent and changeable as a political act, using a lot of experimentation with non-traditional materials and techniques, questioning ideas of hierarchy and value, kind of repurposing or upcycling just debris and kind of everyday detritus to transform them into something else entirely. Works that appear almost vulnerable in their mercurial state, but also feel almost monumental similarly, and grappling with entrenched legacies of also violence and colonialism. And Jeneen's work will actually be on all floors of the museum and has actually 3 works and one of which will kind of be placed throughout. And I can let you speak now a little bit more to these individual works.
Oh, thanks so much, Margot. I think that sets a sense of just the physicality of the experience of going through the exhibition, which is really helpful, especially for those of us who might not be able to be there physically, but understanding the relationships between different floors and works and processes. And I think, you saying that your research was done starting 3 years ago, the anticipatory nature of I think, the elevated way audiences will be able to connect with the content, knowing that as we all grapple with kind of this moment of change and flux, I mean, the works that you're presenting offer different perspectives of how artists can offer ways of self-reflecting and finding some sense of context for this impermanent, shifting world we're in. And so you mentioned Jeneen's work being installed throughout the exhibition in these kind of small balls. If we can pull up the image, Jeneen, I'd really love to discuss the piece Fighting for the Title, Not to Be Pending. And it's the work that one will engage with, as Margot said, when you enter the show, but also throughout. So in a lot of ways, I feel like this is a really great and important work to start the conversation with. Would you be open to speaking further about the work and its intents and how you see it within this new museum context? These images are taken from the Kunstverein Bouwschwig, which is a gorgeous installation outdoors. Curious how you see it kind of translating into this new space and context of the Triennial.
Thank you. So this artwork the title of this artwork is Fighting for the Title Not to Be Pending. And before I get into that, I want to introduce myself because it's also part of my People's Protocol. So Shori Jeneen Vajri, and my name's Jeneen Frei Njootli, and I am phoning in. We're talking today, and I'm in my People's Home Territory of the Vantakwichin First Nation in Old Crow, Yukon. And I lived on and off for like 14 years in the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, which is where I received a lot of my formal educational training. So that's just some business I have to take care of when I'm in these spaces. And it also ties into this, it deeply informs my practice. And so for this work, Fighting for the Title Not to Be Pending, I'm thinking, of course, about land title. I'm thinking about the variety of, or the multitude of actions that have taken place over the last many years, or pretty much since contact, around Indigenous peoples, for us, like fighting for our rights and titles and sovereignty over our lands and also over our bodies. And as a sound-based performance artist, I find ways to work with materials that hold the space of a gesture, or find ways to represent my body without, not necessarily that binary of like presence and absence, but trying to locate a space that's a space other than that. And for this one, it's my body weight in beads that are rubbed into the ground around the outside of the gallery here. And in terms of how it will be impacted, how that work will shift when it's in New York, is thinking I want to be able to draw attention to colonial legacies and Indigenous presences in the different places that this work is shown. And as the work is installed, when it's deinstalled and installed into a new space, it's impossible to gather the same amount of beads back. And what does it also mean that this body of work, that this body of beads is is dissipating over time, or with its engagement with art institutions. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that will shift in New York.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate kind of just that added element of thinking also how this piece is going to move forward in time after this exhibition, and how the physicality of that is going to kind of evolve and shift, and kind of the parameters of the piece that will live on beyond the exhibition in new spaces. And I'm sure it'll also be a really rewarding way for people to also look and engage with the architecture of the space in a new way, with a new awareness and sensitivity to this piece being present around them, and taking more time to understand their relationship to the architecture of the museum itself as well, and the land that it's on. Nadia, your work also holds space in a way that I think in some ways has elements of, I wrote in my notes an antithesis, but I'm not sure if that's really correct. But your pieces that are being installed are really anchored in the idea of the contained. There's work that kind of is from this extended series of these barrels that has shown at the Kunstverein Bergsveg as well. Maybe we can bring up an image of that, and you can kind of, I'd love to hear you speak about the material nature of these barrels, the idea of containment, but then also, I think maybe similar to Jeneen's, the kind of relationship to place and space that these materials have for you.
Yeah, thank you also for having me here, and thank you to everyone for organizing this. So yeah, we, Jeneen and I actually showed this work in the same space at the same time. And yeah, I don't know about the antithesis position, but it definitely has a feeling of containment, but I think I'm also kind of referencing the sort of opposite of that. I think I'm also trying to grapple with both the idea of containment and spilling at the same time. So just to give you a sense of what we're looking at the first iteration, or the first edition of this work that's now evolved over time and will show in its third edition at the new museum at the Triennial. And so to give you a sense, it kind of was, I guess, conceived in around 2019 during a residency that I was able to physically participate in the Azores of Portugal, which is the archipelago of islands in the middle of the Atlantic, which is where my parents basically descended from and immigrated from in the 1970s to Toronto, where I am generally based. So there was a practice, and still is a practice, of sort of sending items, goods, gifts, things in this kind of, I guess, inexpensive way by sea in barrels back to these like islands where things were kind of, obviously remote for a really long time. As globalization changes things feel less remote, but the practice still kind of exists actually. And I thought of this idea of sending myself something when I was going to return to the Azores. I never actually did return to the Azores because, of course, things changed and it wasn't possible anymore. So this work is interesting to me because I don't think I've had a work like this. I don't think I've worked in a way that's evolved this slowly. I think like it's been, yeah, maybe I have, no, but I think this is different for me in that this is really taking time. Something about obviously the last couple of years have shifted time, but it's all based in time, like the idea of travel and the idea of like these barrels almost like floating along the sea. Like I think having that kind of idea in my head, at least as I make these, even if they physically cross the sea or not, is really important to me. And I think this idea of like trying to contain these things, items, ideas, maybe dreams, like kind of in this sort of photographic way, I think, and sculptural way is, I think in some ways, it's a sincere attempt, but it also, I think, is clumsy. And I like that there's these kinds of gaps and holes and, this architecture that comes from stacking them as they normally are kept in storage, for example, have these holes that you can see through them. It's not a very good wall if you think of a wall. So I don't know if I've touched on everything about the work.
No, I feel like it's an expansive project, and I'm sure, like, even just looking at the stills and the images, you mentioned briefly kind of the reference of photography, which has really anchored, I think, and been a thread through a lot of your work. But I feel like there's going to be rewards in viewing and narratives and stories in each of these like individually contained moments that kind of will push and expand anyone who's looking through into like different portals of experience. Like they're each is so held but expansive.
And they shift, right? I think there's something about the modularity about these works, like, like thinking of these cells as sort of building blocks, or in some ways I think of them as lenses or cameras, like these kind of still lives that kind of stack on top of each other. I think that the fact that they will be in multiple places and travel and shift, for example, this work that you're looking at has kind of already formed and mutated into this larger collection of barrels, and that is being exhibited at the Archipelago Contemporary in the Azores right now. And then there's going to be another set of barrels in the new museum, and then over and then there's going to be some morphing that happens even after that. So I think this shifting kind of nature of the work is really exciting for me, and I think I can see also for other artists. And I'm excited to see that kind of, impermanence embraced in the new museum, and I'm into it.
I'm very into it too. It's exciting, and it'll be nice to kind of hopefully be able to, through the documentation, and who knows where we'll be, but peep into these portals in person in some way. They're definitely, I'm already just like, oh, I want to be in front of this so badly. And I think that the role of impermanence being a thematic that carries through the exhibition, but also, the role of photography and that being a presence in your work that's expanded into something that has an impermanence. And then thinking about Laurie's work as well. And Laurie, your practice has been photo-based in a lot of ways, maybe really anchored in the material elements of photography, using photo papers, using photochemicals, but experimenting with the kind of the temporal nature of that. So what happens when something is left unfixed or open? And for your new museum piece, you're going to be doing quite a large scale installation with materials that are anchored in that photo paper, but also in the idea of architecture in the space. Can you talk a little bit about, with this element of change, how you imagine your work kind of evolving over time? Maybe you can bring up an image. There's a work that was at TPW that maybe best echoes some of the intents for what I understand to be the work that will be in the new museum show. I'm wondering if you can kind of offer us just a little bit more insight into how you see that impermanent nature can play out in the photo elements of these works. And also thank you again for joining. It's nice to see your face.
Oh, thanks for having me. And thanks, Jeneen, Nadia, and Margot. It's been really nice to hear you all talk about your thoughts on the show and your work too. So yeah, as you said, I often use like photo paper and film in unfixed states. And I mean, I think my draw to the medium, not that I only exclusively work with the material constraints of the medium, but I often do. And that has a lot to do with being interested in how the structure of something or the holder of something is just as constitutive of what it creates as, I mean, it's part and parcel of what it creates, and it dictates a lot of that. So I see these materials as like vessels and carriers in that sense, and very like porous and spongy and absorbing as much as they're leaking out. And then a lot of the sculptural materials I work with kind of like have that same quality to them, including these building materials, like wall building materials, which, you know, they're made for creating spaces, which hold bodies, which, you know, go on to shape in like obvious and less obvious ways, shape the bodies that are held by them. So there's like an aspect of care as well as control within those material choices as well. And yeah, so I'm going to be making an installation for the new museum. And I think in your notes, in the framing of this question, you talked about, or you mentioned iterance, and that word stuck out to me. And so I wanted to speak on that as a way to kind of try and speak to the work a bit more, this notion of like doing or saying again or repetition, which I do feel like the photo papers do, the films do. I often like reuse films that were shown in other spaces, like sometimes with natural light, sometimes with just gallery light. And so they kind of like accrue those spaces, the affects, the environments, the viewers' presences over the course of the exhibition. And then they're kind of like imbued into the next space. So they're carriers in that sense, and they're always reiterating. And, you know, it's a reflection of how I see the personal body operating in the world, as well as like larger social bodies. And yeah, I think that I'm kind of answering the question with that. I actually know what I wanted to do. I read a text yesterday that made me be like, oh, she always says it better than I can ever say it. It's in this collection of essays or texts the book is called Why Are They So Afraid of the Lotus? And the CCA Waddish just put it out. It has like a great Divya Mera image on top. But the first text is a Trinity Minha text whose writing I always return to. And it's an excerpt from a text called Grandma's Story. And it's short, so I'll just read it because I feel like it answers the question better than I could. So it says, in this chain and continuum, I am but one link. The story is me, neither me nor mine. It does not really belong to me. And while I feel greatly responsible for it, I also enjoy the irresponsibility of the pleasure obtained through the process of transferring. Pleasure in the copy, pleasure in the reproduction. No repetition can ever be identical, but my story carries with it their stories, their history, and our story repeats itself endlessly despite our persistence in denying it.
Thank you so much, Laurie. I really appreciate you bringing that. I feel like it's there's something about that idea of iteration in relationship to evolution that in a lot of ways is carried out through all of your practices. Like, I think my last question initially was going to be about, well, for those of who can't see the exhibition, you know, physically, what do you want them to understand? But I think that there's something in each of your works where, you know, these pieces don't have an end point. They're not for just that space. They're meant to be in that space for that a lot of time, and then they'll all continue on and evolve through that, which I think is a really kind of nice way to feel in relation to those pieces. Maybe you can also circulate, Laurie, the details on that, so we can link it or have a note for anyone that's looking to the source material of that quote.
Yeah, no, it was really nice
I
to
think
see.
with that, maybe.
Oh, sorry. I was just
Laurie,
gonna
sorry,
say it was really nice to see, like, feel some of the divergences, but connections between what Jeneen is doing and Nadia is doing. And Nadia, like even you mentioning cells, and I was thinking about cells, Jeneen, with your work and how it's kind of like how they spread outside the gallery and in the gallery, at least in that iteration of the work, like capillaries or veins or something like that. And but things are like both like microscopic and then zoomed in and large. And yeah, I'm excited to see all the works together. It's been nice to like at least understand more what two people are doing, and I'm excited for everyone else's too.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to say that beads are sneaky. Like they're gonna hop in people's shoes. They're never gonna fully leave that site. And they're hard to track. And I feel like their resistance to being fully contained or being this like leaking, spreading body is something that feels very indigenous, maybe also very queer, but also very like what can I say against the state here? But just that, yeah, that kind of refusal. And it's so lovely to, I've followed both of your works for some time now too, and it's such an honor to get to show alongside you and to get to hear more about your work, Nadia, because we shared our work has shared space before we've shared space.
And it's been amazing. It's interesting to hear too. It seems like a lot of our work is very much like being sent in place of us, like especially with your work, Jeneen, and also yours, Laurie. Like this, and mine too. This idea of like, okay, I'm sending this instead of me, and I think it's and this idea that we're all trying to contain ourselves, but not at the same time, or show some kind of version of ourselves. And it's kind of insane that we haven't been able to be in the physical space yet, Jeneen. I was hoping that we could in New York, but who knows, right? We have to keep sending these objects in our place, I think, for I don't know how long. Yeah.
And maybe that kind of brings back to thinking about Trinity Minha. And I'm so struck by just her, that the idea of thinking nearby.
Yeah, she has that whole speaking nearby and thinking nearby, which is always about the peripheral and not the direct view, which I love as well. I can definitely see that in your practice, Jeneen, and yours, Nadia, too, like the repetition and changing. And I definitely think that, like, while, you know, all of our works take up space in very specific and different ways. And like, for example, my wall installations, yes, they're on the large side, but the intention is always to point back to the viewer's body. So it's almost like, it's not a mirror by any means, but it's a way to kind of like push outside of the thing itself. And yeah, that the notion of speaking nearby is something I like totally return to over and over again. I think she's just amazing. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too.
I love how this conversation is going, and I also wanted to bring in this idea, not just about actually about this idea of a group show, which I feel like relates to this too, because there's a certain generosity, I feel like, in all of these works in relationship to the space around it, the viewers that are around it. Also, like, you know, even like with Laurie's work, that it has like apertures, which like you see other works through it. Nadia is the same way, you're looking at and through something simultaneously. And yeah, with Jeneen's, that like, I love that work spreads and it gets deeply embedded. And like, I love that what you were saying about the state, and, you know, even about the institution itself, and how it points to so much history and culture that pervades these spaces without it even, you know, without us thinking about it commonly. And yeah, I I can't wait to see these works in conversation with each other.
I guess, well, I also hope there's an opportunity to see it in person. And I think even just hearing about this importance of the relationships between pieces, I think that's really clear through the conversation here. But for those of us who might be visiting remotely, maybe just as a summary, is there anything, I guess, to keep in mind or to think about as we view either documentation, talks, all of that? I think there is no stand-in necessarily for a physical experience, but as all of us try to find our ways to be close to the intents of this exhibition and glean from the relationships that you're putting together, Margot. If you have any advice for those of us, I think engaging with the exhibition peripherally, would really welcome that for those, since we are on a digital platform right now, for those who are going to have to navigate it that way. Maybe if any of the artists also have thoughts on that, it's really welcome.
Sure, I can speak firstly concretely to like what will be in place for those viewing the show remotely. And actually the first thing that I wanted to mention is the show's catalog, which I'm just really proud of. And the designers of the book are Pacific Design Studio, Elizabeth Karp-Evans and Adam Trimble, and they did an incredible job with this book. So I did just want to give that a shout out. Also, we've commissioned 40 interviews with all of the artists in the show for this book as well, which is atypical, I think, for a survey exhibition of this size to include, but it was important for us that we have the artist voices included in this book, but also the voices of those colleagues and curators and scholars that have been a part of this, intense global network that was instrumental in putting the show together. Shows like this take more than a village. It takes a lot of people connecting us to various people all over the world. And it was important for us to include these voices in conversation as well. And I think this idea of conversation is also something that was important for us to bring out, even in this catalog. And then in terms of digital programs, there will be plenty. We're doing lots of panels and conversations throughout the course of the show, so please stay tuned for that. We also have this website, newmuseum.tv, where we'll do a lot of video programming. But I also wanted to mention that I think one of the things that was guiding us a little bit, even like in the show, maybe not consciously, but was also how important it is to view works in person. So it feels terrible in a way to even say this, of course we're like here remotely and doing our best to engage with this, but the medium is important. And a lot of the material of these works is also important to consider, and how they do demand a slower pace and a deeper engagement. I dearly hope that it will be possible for people to see the show. And I think that, we were also almost thinking about it as an antidote in a way to this relationship that we have with screens, because a lot of these works do change over time and they do have this qualities to them that were really difficult to even grasp when you're viewing them remotely. But of course, we'll do our best and kind of see how that happens. And one more thing I wanted to mention was, I feel like something like, even when researching the show, I feel like artists are often described as being prescient. I mean, there's something I think about the way that these artists have almost like a sensitivity to these very subtle tremors before they become earthquakes. It's like something that we were kind of thinking about. And I think a lot of these works kind of pick that up. And, for me, it's like, I think of these works and these artists almost like guides, if you will, to pay really close attention to, and on an intuitive level, as well as, something that is kind of more apparent, frontally.
Thanks, Margo. I really appreciate that. And absolutely, there's something invaluable about the physical in-person experience in front of in front of a work and with a work, alongside a work. I think maybe with that, unless anyone wants to add in anything else, I'll say a very final thank you so much to you all, Jeneen, Laurie, Nadia, and Margot, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And it's definitely given me a deeper understanding of kind of the context for this exhibition. And I think, you know, a deeper appreciation for what this triennial's intents are and the role of it within larger conversations. So thank you all. And hopefully those who aren't seeing the work in person can view your pieces in physical space in other ways, and that many people can go and spend time with the entirety of the exhibition in person. So thank you very much. And
Thank you,
take
Corrie,
care.
as well.